a.m. in New Orleans tonight on the banks of the Mississippi River, which flows from here down to the Gulf, where the story remains the oil spill gushing uncontrolled into the Gulf of Mexico. There's a ton of reporting to do about that tonight, including a firsthand up-close examination of the actual oil that's pouring into the ocean and threatening the coast. We will get to the ongoing Deepwater Horizon disaster in just a moment. But we begin tonight with the news from New York. The arrest and impending arraignment of the alleged Times Square bomber. At around 4 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York City released the charges being brought against Faisal Shehzad, a 30-year-old American citizen living in Connecticut. Shehzad will be booked on a total of 5 counts, including attempting to detonate a weapon of mass destruction. The WMD in question being the Rube Goldberg-esque failed explosive device he allegedly left smoking in a green SUV parked in Times Square on Saturday night. Shehzad's booking in federal court will follow last night's dramatic late-night arrest as Mr. Shehzad apparently attempted to flee the country. As law enforcement officials were trying to track him down yesterday, Mr. Shehzad purchased a last-minute ticket for Emirates Flight 202 from JFK Airport in New York to Dubai. Mr. Shehzad arrived at JFK. He parked. He got his boarding pass. He passed security screening. He boarded the flight. The door to the plane was closed. The plane received initial clearance for takeoff when at the last minute, U.S. officials stopped the plane. They reopened the cabin door. They themselves boarded the flight, and they took Mr. Shehzad off that plane with them.
By my calculation, from the time Faisal Shehzad drove into and across Broadway and parked that vehicle to when he was apprehended last evening at the JFK airport, it was 53 hours and 20 minutes. Now, we know that Jack Bauer can do it in 24 minutes. But in the real world, 53 is a pretty good number.
Self-congratulations aside, shortly after police arrested Mr. Shehzad last night, he did reportedly admit to driving the jerry-rigged, dysfunctional car bomb into Times Square.
It is clear that this was a terrorist plot aimed at murdering Americans in one of the busiest places in our country. We believe that this suspected terrorist fashioned a bomb from rudimentary ingredients, placed it in a rusty SUV, and drove it into Times Square with the intent to kill as many innocent tourists and theatergoers as possible.
If Mr. Shehzad hadn't readily admitted to that, investigators were prepared to present a trove of physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. For example, a key ring left in the ignition of that SUV, which also contained a key to Mr. Shehzad's house in Connecticut, and as well as to another car that he owned. Whatever the level of Mr. Shehzad's intentions or affiliations, his terrorist tradecraft seems to have been strictly low grade. That said, with his would-be bomb neutralized and towed away, and with Mr. Shehzad himself in custody and reportedly talking to his interrogators, the livest wire of this investigation remains his links to broader terrorist organizations and causes. Within hours of the failed bombing attempt in Times Square on Saturday night, the Taliban in Pakistan, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, was already claiming credit for the attack. They posted this audio tape on YouTube, hailing the, quote, recent attack in the USA. This attack, they claimed, was meant to avenge the killing of al-Qaeda's 2 top leaders in Iraq last month, as well as the recent Predator drone strikes on Pakistan by U.S. forces. The Pakistani Taliban's claim of responsibility was widely dismissed when it first came out. But now it has taken on a whole new significance. The charge sheet released today says that, quote, after the arrest, Shehzad admitted that he had recently received bomb-making training in Waziristan, Pakistan. Faisal Shehzad's connections to Pakistan are fairly extensive. Although he is a U.S. citizen, Mr. Shehzad was born in a village outside Peshawar, Pakistan, a village called Pabi. After becoming a U.S. citizen last year, Mr. Shehzad traveled to Karachi and Peshawar for more than a month. In February of this year, Mr. Shehzad returned to the United States from a 5-month trip to Pakistan. And court documents now say that Mr. Shehzad received 4 telephone calls from a Pakistani phone number on the day he purchased the SUV that was ultimately left filled with explosives in Times Square. Now, none of those instances of travel to Pakistan or phone calls to or from Pakistan, of course, are themselves evidence of any kind of wrongdoing. But arrests in this case are reportedly being made in Pakistan. And the race is on now to try to find and trace any real connections that may exist between Faisal Shehzad and the Pakistani Taliban. If he did receive bomb-making training in Pakistan or anywhere else, it appears that training was thankfully tremendously inadequate.
It does not appear, from our opinion, to be the most sophisticated device. There are a number of opportunities for the device to fail.
The Justice Department released a diagram today, this diagram, of the contents of Mr. Shehzad's SUV. Several white bags of fertilizer contained in a gun locker, 2 5-gallon gasoline canisters, 152 commercially available M88 fireworks, 3 propane gas canisters, and 2 alarm clocks connected to wires. Apparently, it was the fireworks that were supposed to serve as a detonating device in this case. The problem is that the propane tanks that were serving as the bomb's supposed main charge, those propane tanks are designed to be fire resistant. One U.S. official telling Newsweek magazine that from what is known of the bomb's construction thus far, it may have been assembled based on a cursory reading of newspaper stories about past bombings. Now, again, it is unclear whether this attempted bombing was directed by the Pakistani Taliban or by any other terrorist group. But if it was, between the amateurish design of the bomb and the fact that the alleged bomber left the keys to his house in the ignition, this incident will be taken as a warning of this terrorist group's aspirations, not of their ability to execute. Joining us now live from Islamabad, Pakistan, is NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. Richard, thank you for getting up so early today to talk to us. Appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. And I've spoken to people who said that although this was very, very amateurish, that it should be considered a warning sign. And there are links definitely back to this country, back in Pakistan. And over the last 24 hours or so, Pakistani officials say they've arrested a dozen suspects in connection to this case.
Richard, what can you tell us about Mr. Shehzad's background, what you've been able to find about his links in Pakistan, and anything else we can find out about where he's come from and what his influences may have been?
Yeah, if you look at the chronology of his life, or at least over the last several years of his life, it paints a very interesting picture. Faisal Shehzad was from a privileged background. His father was a very senior commander in the Pakistani Air Force. He actually established the Pakistani version of the Blue Angels, you know, that acrobatic flight group. He was at one stage head of the Civil Aviation Authority here. So he came from a very prominent military family. Then Faisal, the son, travels to the United States, graduates with a BA in computer science from Bridgeport in Connecticut, Bridgeport University in Connecticut in 2000, buys a house in Connecticut in 2004, somewhat living the American dream. He gets a mortgage for about $214,000. It's a 3-bedroom house with a pool in the back. So he's doing quite well. Gets his MBA in also in Bridgeport, again, information technology in 2005. Has the first of his 2 children in 2006. Things start to fall apart, however, for him later in his life. 2008, he starts to have trouble making payments on the mortgage. By 2009, he's already in foreclosure. He's becoming more and more estranged from his wife. At one stage, the wife leaves. Why she leaves is exactly unclear. Then in 2009, when he's losing his house, he's having trouble with his marriage, he quits his job. He's working at this stage as a junior financial analyst, and he comes here to Pakistan. He arrives in June of 2009, and he leaves in February 2010. And it's this window, these 8 months, that law enforcement officials are focusing on right now. What was he doing in Pakistan? While he was here, Faisal Shehzad has admitted that he did receive some training in making bombs, and that training took place in Waziristan. How much training, however, and who was organizing it is still a matter of investigation.
Richard, in terms of us trying to piece together the clues about how connected he may have been to militant groups, as you mentioned, he has described, he has said that he received bomb-making training in Waziristan. An intelligence official in Pakistan has told Reuters today that he may have received military training in a town called Kohat. We're also hearing reports that he may have links to a militant group called Jaish-e-Mohammed. Do any of those things sound important to you in terms of understanding what we're dealing with here and how connected he was?
He was from a very prominent family, as I just discussed, and he was from an area where there was a lot of militant groups operating. His family has a home in Peshawar, and during his visit, he came to his visit here to Pakistan. He went to Karachi, which also has a lot of militant activity. Went to Peshawar, and then went down to Waziristan. The reason there have been some suspected links to Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is one of many Kashmiri groups, is one, he's an ethnic Kashmiri, and two, the person who is now under arrest that he met up with in Karachi was arrested at a mosque that has links to Jaish-e-Mohammed. So the question is, did he have links? Did he have associations with people who were involved in militant groups? It seems that he certainly did. Did they actively recruit him, or did he come on his own?